And that was part 3 of the Vermont Movie, Refuge, Reinvention, and Revolution. I am joined again by Nora Jacobson, who is the executive director of the project. Also joined by Patrick Cody, who directed one of the segments, as well as Kate Cone, who was one of the producers and Nora's close collaborators on this film. Nora, I'm going to start with you. This was the hippie segment. It was all hippies all the time. Tell me a little bit about how that whole movement, if you will, shaped you and got you going into this. You know, if it had an impact on you, and made you want to do this movie as a result.
I've always wanted to make a film about hippies because I always felt that everything that's been done about hippies and the counterculture, and there have been a lot of films, never quite got what I thought was important or never portrayed them properly. And so all these years, and I'm a little bit younger, like I never lived on a commune, but I always looked with envy at the commune movement. And so this was an opportunity actually with the Vermont Movie to delve into that time period. And so that's what I did. That was the first segment that I personally signed up to do, the 60s in Vermont. And I think they've had a big impact on Vermont.
So was this kind of what got the impetus for the whole movie going, or was it one part of it?
Well, in a way, yes. You know, my father, I wouldn't call him a hippie, but he was one of the early Back to the Landers in the 30s. Definitely not a hippie. But later on, but he certainly formed my ideas and why I wanted to even make this film. But then two people, Grace Paley and Marty Jaser. Marty was a hippie, and actually you see him in part 3. He was ailing, and I thought, gosh, we've got to get him down on film before he dies. This was very early on. He might have been one of the first interviews I even did, he and Grace Paley. And Grace Paley, the author, was not a hippie either, but she was closely allied with some of those people.
Absolutely. Patrick Cody, you directed the segment on Romaine Tenney, which was just another fascinating but often forgotten part of Vermont history. Tell me a little bit about what drew you to that segment and what you found out as you went along directing it.
Well, Romaine Tenney was certainly not a hippie either, but I think what he did, which was the ultimate sacrifice and the ultimate protest, really, I think strikes a chord, and I love how Nora kind of wove in that story with the whole theme of the Back to the Land movement and the highways coming in and changing the whole culture of Vermont. I live on the other side of the mountain from where Tenney grew up and lived in Ascutney, Vermont. I live on the other side of Mount Ascutney in West Windsor. I had never heard of Romaine Tenney until Nora really pitched the story to me, and I said, wow, that is fascinating. I mean, I go by that spot, which is where the Exit 8 interchanges and the park and ride sits now all the time. And so the more I got into the story, the more research I did and talked to family members and past neighbors. It was such a big story at the time in 1964. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary. It was September 11th, 1964, when he barricaded himself in the house and burnt it down. And the day before the bulldozers came to take his property in the name of eminent domain. So this story has been reported on seldomly since, but last year it was also around the same time that the Part 3 screened for the first time. There was a big story that ran in Yankee Magazine and sort of put that story back on the map. And I noticed it went around the internet a little bit and through social media, so it's kind of put that name, Romaine Tenney, back in people's minds.
Okay, let's take a look at a clip.
And it happens to be that his property was right here, right in this area. His house was right there by the off-ramp.
A friend of mine who worked on the survey crew remembers vividly choosing the peak of the roof in the barn as sort of the center line for the highway. If they'd gone 5 degrees one way or the other, it would have been a different story.
Yes, I think it's emblematic of how people feel about eminent domain. You're powerless.
I'll never forget being assigned to get a picture of the opening of that stretch of the interstate. They just took down the barricades and the cars started rolling on it, and I went back to Rutland and wrote a brief story. I guess probably I'd like to erect a monument down there where that man died.
Let me move over to Kate and talk to you a little bit. You were the producer one of the producers on this and worked very closely with Nora on the project. What drew you to this project? And we talked with Nora after part 1 about, you know, how this isn't just a history book. This is not, you know, A, B, C, D happened. Tell me about your vision and what you brought to this project when working with Nora on this.
Well, my vision was that it was local. It was filming, which was what I did, and also I had a great respect for Nora as a filmmaker, and when the idea of filmmakers coming out of their individual work and working with other filmmakers, that appealed to me. The amount of the first meeting, seeing people who had worked individually talking about working together, I think was both exciting and kind of frightening to some people. And so what I brought to the project, I think, was just a sense of commitment and continuity, and I am very happy that I stuck with it. I can't say enough about the process and the people involved, and how working together on one project with so many tentacles, some of which are left aside and didn't make it in, and some of which are fundamental pieces that will go down forever. They all counted as part of that glue that made this process and movie what it is.
And one of the parts that did make it in was the discussion of the Poor Farm segment, which you actually played a part in. Let's take a look at a clip talking about the poor farms in Vermont.
Well, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I never heard it referred to as the poor farm until I was an adult. It was always the farm or the town farm. I guess I always thought it was just a farm that the town of Manchester owned and that my grandmother operated for the town. And I can remember my father talking about sitting on the porch, rocking chairs, talking with some of the men. In fact, that became a little bit of a contentious issue with one of my aunts when I confronted her with the fact that, Aunt Helen, I didn't realize it was a poor farm. Oh, we never called it that. No, it was the farm. It was the town farm.
Great stuff. Kate Cone, thank you. You were producing that. Let me talk to you a little bit. You mentioned a lot of stuff ended up on the cutting room floor. I shudder to think. There was a lot of Vermont history that didn't make it in, obviously. Were there particular things that you were especially proud of that did make it in, or things that you learned along the way that surprised you? A favorite segment, perhaps? Or?
Well, I do love the labor section, that part 2. I also love I love the way the sense of the Abenaki in Vermont has given me a feeling in the woods. I mean, the woods is someplace that's very dear to me. So I think those pieces are remarkable. I also love the fact that the film brings you to the present. And so it's not all about looking back, it's about looking forward. So the fact that we're talking about real issues that we're facing today in terms of power and environmental choices that we're all making, I think those are all important things. So I guess I would point to those 4 things.
Absolutely. And we look forward to those in part 4, which is coming up. Doers and Shapers is the next segment. Nora, tell us a little bit about what we'll be seeing in part 4 of the Vermont movie.
Well, Doers and Shapers is really about, it's not just the legislation, the environment, it's environmental legislation, it's cultural legislation, but the root of it is that education makes us good citizens, and Vermont has a very strong history in education. It was one of the first states to require, in fact, perhaps the first state to require in its constitution that children get a public education. So really, democracy and education are really linked in my mind, and so that's why part 4 is about Goddard College and innovation in education, John Dewey, the great educational innovator, in the Putney School, but also it's about legislation that makes Vermont a more civil society. So environmental legislation and the gay rights issue is a big part of it.
Great. Part 4, Nora Jacobson. We will look forward to that. Patrick Cody and Kate Cone, thank you for joining us. I'm Colin Parker. We will see you here next time for more of the Vermont Movie.